back. In my last video, we talked about rhetorical weapons, or the tools we use to move and persuade an audience. Today, we'll be talking about the affections, or exactly what it is that we want to communicate to our audience. Welcome back to Kailey's Chronicles. First, we have to go back to discuss some Baroque psychology. And how does that make you feel? René Descartes was a French philosopher who wrote Les Passions de l'âme, or The Passions of the Soul, in 1649. The book was inspired by his many conversations with Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. In their many conversations, they were trying to reconcile why the passions have so much influence over otherwise very rational human beings. To put it in modern psychology terms, the passions are what we now call emotions. But there is an important distinction between the two. Emotions today are defined as this inner state of mind created by your own brain and your own body. The passions were thought of as external forces that acted upon you, that you had to suffer through or just endure. The passions we must endure. Since the passions were this naturally occurring phenomenon that afflicted the body, causing fainting or laughter, Descartes goes about explaining them in a very scientific way. He describes the passions as perceptions, sensations, or commotions of the soul that are maintained or strengthened by the spirits. In modern terminology, spirits is something similar to the nervous system. Descartes outlines 6 basic passions: wonder, love, hatred, desire, joy, and sadness. He says that all other passions can be derived from or are subsets of these 6. And what exactly does this have to do with music? Well, this theory of the passions became known as the doctrine of the affections, and it influenced lots of artists, including Baroque composers. And you'll often hear me using the word affect instead of passions when we talk about the music, because affect means the experience of feeling a passion. Experiencing the passion is what's really interesting to the performer, because in a way, you become the external force that rises and quells the passions of the audience. And how exactly are you planning to rise and quell the passions if the composers aren't alive to tell you what affects they intended? Well, like any ambiguous Valentine's Day date, there are always clues to what the other person is thinking. Sup? What does that even mean? In vocal music, there's a text, so getting clues can be pretty easy. But in instrumental music, it's a little bit more difficult to infer what the composer means. The first clue we get is function. What was this piece written for? Is it for the church or the theater? Is it dance music? All these things can tell you a lot about the emotional content. Okay, if he says meet at the restaurant, then he likes me. But if he says meet and just hang, then we're just friends. The next clue is the key in which the piece is written. Unlike a piano, Baroque instruments are not tuned in equal temperament, which means that some keys are more in tune than others, and each key has its own distinct sound and character. Composers such as Quantz thought that each key corresponded to a specific affect, like D major for rejoicing and E minor for tenderness. But not all composers agreed with Quantz, so you have to remember that no key is specifically happy or specifically sad. It's not black and white, and the key is only one clue of many when deciding the affect of a piece. He likes me not. I don't get it. Within the key, there's another clue: harmony. Baroque music is based on the contrast between consonance and dissonance. In general, dissonance is foreboding, full of grief, sadness, or anger, and consonance can mean restful, peace, or tenderness. These shifts between consonance and dissonance can show you the fluctuations within a basic affect, such as joy to bittersweet within an overall affect of happiness. Another clue is rhythm. Think back to our rhetorical weapons and how I said the tempo of someone's speech can vary depending on what you're trying to communicate. This applies to what's composed as well. In general, slower rhythms mean something more grandiose and serious, whereas faster rhythms mean something lighthearted and carefree. It's also important to keep an eye out for syncopations. They're often a sign of impatience. Okay, must wait exactly 7 minutes to reply so he doesn't think I'm too needy. Remember what I said when I was talking about keys and how it's not black and white? The size of intervals can show affects, but you really have to take context into consideration. In general, smaller intervals are more pleasant and lovely, whereas larger intervals are more agitated and intense. For example, a rising sixth can mean lamenting, which is seen in Bach's El Bamadich. If you're curious, Judy Charling's book has a really great chart with all the different intervals and the affects that correspond with each of them. Looking at intervals brings me to another great clue, tessitura, or how high or low in pitch a passage of music is. It's easy to compare this to someone raising or lowering their speaking voice. Often high pitches mean louder and excited, and lower pitches mean softer and more content. Coming to a few final clues, there's instrumentation. Different instruments naturally have their own unique colors that suggest affect. For example, trumpets suggest very triumphant affects, whereas lutes suggest something more sweet. Also keep an eye out for textural changes, such as having the strings play pizzicato. Humans and their emotions can be really confusing and complex, so don't expect the emotional implications of a piece to be simplified by I stare at it long enough, it will ring. So complicated. The beauty and also the great challenge of Baroque music is to express all the different fluctuations in affect. For example, it's never simple like a piece is just happy. So it's important to put your detective hats on when you're learning a new piece. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget, stay hip. This week's musician's struggle moment.